Beloved, I want to talk to you tonight about something the world markets constantly but rarely teaches truthfully: how to make a man love you. Not just for a season, not just for the honeymoon phase, not just until the excitement wears off, but forever. Understand something from the outset. Anyone can create a spark. Chemistry is cheap. It happens in coffee shops and comment sections every single day. But a spark is not the same thing as a fire that survives decades. A spark requires nothing. It happens by accident. A fire that lasts forever requires stewardship, daily, deliberate, intentional tending. Tonight, I am not going to teach you how to attract a man. I am going to teach you the deeper, more sacred work of building a love that does not expire. Song of Solomon 8:6-7 gives us one of the most powerful pictures of enduring love in all of Scripture. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. This is not a love that survives because it never faces waters or floods. This is a love that survives because it has been built strong enough to withstand them. That is the love we are pursuing tonight. Not a love that avoids storms, but a love that stands through them. I have studied enduring marriages, the ones that last 40, 50, 60 years and are still tender, still affectionate, still full of admiration. And I have studied marriages that started with tremendous passion and ended in bitter silence. The difference was almost never the initial chemistry. The difference was what was built brick by brick in the years no one was watching. Tonight, I want to give you those bricks. Let's dive in. Foundation. Understanding what forever actually requires. Forever is not a feeling, it is a structure. Before we go into the specific keys, I need to correct something in how many of us think about lasting love. We often speak of love as though it is purely a feeling, something that either exists or doesn't. Something you either have or lose. Almost like weather that happens to you. But beloved, the love that lasts forever is not primarily a feeling. It is a structure, a set of daily choices, patterns, and commitments that feelings live inside of. Think of it this way. A feeling is like a flame, but a structure is like a heart. A flame with no heart flickers wildly, catches wind, and eventually burns out or spreads out of control. But a flame contained within a well-built hearth can burn steadily for a lifetime, providing warmth through every season, every storm, every cold night. Tonight, we are not just discussing how to create sparks of feeling, we are discussing how to build a hearth that makes those feelings sustainable. The danger of building on feeling alone. 1 Corinthians 3:11 tells us, other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. While this verse speaks directly to salvation, the principle transfers beautifully to relationships. Whatever you build your love upon will determine whether it survives. If a relationship is built entirely on feeling, on chemistry, on the thrill of newness, it will be as unstable as sand shifting under a house. Matthew 7:26-7. But if it is built on truth, on covenant, on daily faithfulness, on Christ-centered commitment, it can withstand any flood. This is not to say feelings don't matter. They matter tremendously. And we will discuss how to keep them alive throughout this teaching. But feelings are meant to be the fruit of a strong structure, not the foundation holding up the entire house. The 10 keys we will explore tonight. Tonight, I want to walk you through 10 specific keys, 10 pillars, if you will, that together form the structure capable of holding a forever love steady through every season. These are not abstract theories. They are patterns drawn from Scripture, from studying enduring marriages, and from years of counseling men and women navigating the real, unglamorous work of building lasting love. We will discuss becoming a genuine student of his heart. We will discuss the non-negotiable role of emotional safety. We will discuss fluency in his love language, shared growth rather than parallel drift, fighting for repair instead of victory, the necessity of ongoing pursuit even after commitment is secured, the cultivation of intimacy as a living garden, championing his legacy, guarding your relationship as sacred territory, and finally anchoring your love in something deeper than feeling alone. Each of these keys builds upon the others. None of them alone is sufficient to sustain a lifetime of love. But together, woven consistently into the daily fabric of your relationship. They form a structure strong enough to hold whatever storms life brings your way. Let us begin. Key one, become a student of his heart, not just his habits. The difference between knowing someone and studying someone. Many relationships stagnate because a woman learns a man's habits, his schedule, his preferences, his routines, but never becomes a genuine student of his heart. Habits are surface information. The heart is where the real relationship lives. To become a student of someone's heart means to consistently, curiously, and humbly seek to understand what drives him, his fears, his childhood wounds, his dreams that he may have buried out of disappointment, the things that make him feel most alive, and the things that quietly wound him even when he doesn't say so. This kind of study never ends because people are not static. The man you married is not the same man 5 years later. He has grown, been shaped by new experiences, faced new pressures. A woman who stops studying assumes she already knows everything. And that assumption is often where distance quietly begins to grow. Proverbs and the value of understanding. Proverbs 20:5 tells us, counsel in the heart of man is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. Notice the imagery, deep water. This is not information sitting on the surface, easily accessible. It requires patience, intention, and skillful drawing out. Many men have never had anyone genuinely curious enough to draw out what's beneath the surface. If you become that person, the one who asks thoughtful questions, who listens without immediately trying to fix or judge, who remembers what he shares and follows up on it later, you become irreplaceable to him, because few people in his life will have offered him that depth of attention. Practical application. Ask questions beyond the surface. Instead of only how was your day, occasionally ask, what's something you've been thinking about lately that you haven't said out loud? Or what did you dream about doing as a kid that you've maybe forgotten? Create space for him to go deep, and when he does, receive it without judgment, without immediately offering advice unless he asks for it. This kind of listening builds a bond that surface level habit tracking never could. The wounds beneath the behavior. I want to go deeper here, because becoming a student of his heart often means learning to see past surface level behavior into the wound that produced it. When a man withdraws, becomes defensive, or reacts with irritability that seems disproportionate to the moment, there is almost always a deeper story, perhaps a childhood where vulnerability was punished or mocked, perhaps a previous relationship where honesty was used against him, perhaps a quiet, long-carried belief that he is fundamentally not enough, formed years before you ever met him. This does not excuse harmful behavior. Accountability still matters. And understanding a wound is never a substitute for addressing its impact. But understanding the wound behind the behavior transforms how you respond to it. Instead of reacting to defensiveness with your own defensiveness, you might recognize it as fear wearing an irritable mask and respond with a steadiness that says, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to use this against you. Over years, this kind of understanding response can actually help heal wounds that predate your entire relationship, not because you are his therapist, but because consistent safe love has genuine healing power. Becoming fluent in his non-verbal language. Many men, particularly those raised in cultures or families where emotional vocabulary was not modeled or encouraged, communicate far more through action and tone than through explicit words. Becoming a student of his heart means learning to read what he communicates non-verbally, the quality of his silence when something is wrong versus when he's simply content, the specific tasks he takes on without being asked when he's trying to show love through service, the subtle changes in his posture or energy that signal stress before he's able to articulate it verbally. This is not about becoming anxious or hypervigilant, constantly analyzing his every mood. It is about developing a calm, attentive familiarity with his patterns so that you can respond with wisdom rather than confusion when his words and his actual internal state don't perfectly align, which for many men happens more often than we'd like to admit. A testimony worth remembering. There was a couple married over 3 decades who were once asked the secret to their enduring love. The wife said something simple but profound. I never stopped being curious about him. Even now, he still surprises me because I never assumed I had him fully figured out. That posture of ongoing curiosity rather than settled assumption kept their relationship alive long after the initial spark of newness had faded. The discipline of asking before assuming. I want to give you one more practical tool before we move to the next key, because I have watched this single discipline transform relationships more than almost any other piece of advice I've given. Before you assume you know why he did something, why he seemed distant, why he responded a certain way, why he made a particular decision, ask. Simply ask with genuine curiosity rather than accusation. Help me understand what was going on for you in that moment. So many misunderstandings that calcify into long-term resentment began as a simple, incorrect assumption that was never actually checked against reality. Proverbs 18:13 warns, he that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him. Asking before assuming is not just good communication, it is biblical wisdom, and it will save your relationship from countless unnecessary wounds accumulated over false interpretations of each other's hearts. Key 2, master the art of consistent emotional safety. Why safety outlasts excitement? We touched on this principle in an earlier teaching, but for lasting love, it deserves to be revisited and deepened, because emotional safety is not just an attraction tool, it is the very soil in which a forever love grows. Excitement fades. It is simply not sustainable at the same intensity across decades, and any relationship built primarily on maintaining excitement will eventually feel exhausting, like chasing a high that keeps requiring more to achieve the same effect. But safety, the quiet, steady knowledge that you can be fully yourself, fully honest, fully imperfect, and still be loved, that does not fade with time. In fact, it deepens. It becomes the very thing that makes long-term love feel better than new love, not worse, because it carries a depth that newness can never offer. The fruit of the Spirit as a relational blueprint. Galatians 5:20, 2-3 lists the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Notice how many of these are directly relevant to creating emotional safety: patience, long-suffering, gentleness, self-control, temperance, peace. A relationship marked by these qualities becomes a sanctuary. A relationship marked by their opposites, impatience, harshness, volatility, control, becomes a battlefield, no matter how much passion exists alongside it. How safety is built and how it is broken. Safety is built through consistency, through being the same person in private that you are in public, through keeping your word even in small things, through responding to vulnerability with tenderness rather than judgment. It is broken through unpredictability, through explosive reactions, through using intimate knowledge as ammunition during arguments, through contempt, eye-rolling, mockery, sarcasm dressed as humor but landing as cruelty. I want to highlight contempt specifically because relationship research consistently identifies it as one of the most corrosive forces in long-term relationships, more damaging even than anger, because anger says I care enough to be upset, while contempt says I see you as beneath me. If you want a love that lasts forever, contempt cannot be allowed to take root. In either direction, practical application. When he shares something vulnerable, a fear, an insecurity, a failure, resist the urge to immediately problem solve or minimize. Simply say, thank you for telling me that, and let him feel the safety of being received without judgment. Guard your tongue fiercely against contempt, even in frustration. Anger can be expressed honestly without cruelty. Rebuilding safety after it has been broken. I want to address something directly, because many of you reading this are not starting from a blank slate. You are trying to rebuild emotional safety after it has already been damaged, whether through your own missteps, his, or the accumulated wear of years of unaddressed conflict. I want you to know that safety, once broken, is not gone forever. It can be rebuilt, though it requires more patience and consistency than it took to establish the first time. The way trust broken is always slower to rebuild than trust newly formed. Rebuilding safety requires radical consistency over an extended period, not one grand romantic gesture, but months, sometimes years of small, reliable, trustworthy behavior that gradually teaches the nervous system it is safe to soften again. It also requires patience with the process itself. You cannot rush someone's healing timeline, even when your intentions going forward are genuinely good. Psalm 34:18 reminds us, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart. If God draws near to the brokenhearted, rather than demanding they hurry through their healing, we would do well to extend that same patient nearness to those we love who are healing from wounds we may have contributed to. Practical application. Continued. If you're rebuilding safety after a season of damage, resist the urge to demand immediate trust in return for immediate effort. Commit instead to sustained, patient consistency and allow healing to unfold on its own timeline rather than yours. Key 3, speak his love language fluently, not just occasionally. Many women know, at least in theory, the concept of love languages, words of affirmation, acts of service, quality time, physical touch, gifts. But knowing the theory and living it fluently are two very different things. A love language spoken occasionally, only when convenient or remembered, functions more like a foreign phrase awkwardly recited than a native tongue fluently spoken. For a love to last forever, his primary love language cannot be something you occasionally remember. It must become something you naturally, consistently express. The way a fluent speaker doesn't have to translate in their head before speaking, the words simply flow. Discovering, not assuming. I want to caution you here. Do not assume you already know his love language based on what you've read or what worked for a friend's husband. Every man is different. Some men feel most love through quality, undistracted time. Others feel most love through acts of service, a meal prepared, a task handled without being asked. Others feel most love through physical affection that isn't necessarily sexual, a hand on the shoulder, sitting close, a lingering embrace. Ask him directly. Observe what he responds to most intensely. Pay attention to what he complains about the absence of, because often our love language reveals itself most clearly in what we miss when he's gone. 1 Corinthians 13 as the ultimate love language. Whatever his specific language, 1 Corinthians 13 to 4 to 7 gives us the universal grammar underneath every dialect of love. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. This is not a wedding day verse to be recited once and forgotten. This is a daily operating manual. Love that endures forever is patient repeatedly, not just once. It is kind consistently, not just when convenient. Practical application. Identify his primary love language this week if you haven't already, through direct conversation. Then commit to expressing it not as an occasional gesture, but as a rhythm. Daily if it's words of affirmation or touch. Weekly if it's quality time or acts of service that require more planning. Fluency comes through repetition, not perfection. Key 4, grow together, not just alongside each other. The danger of parallel lives. One of the quietest killers of long-term love is not conflict, it is drift. Many couples don't fall apart through dramatic betrayal. They fall apart through years of living parallel lives, physically present but emotionally and spiritually growing in different directions, until one day they realize they no longer know each other the way they once did. For a love to last forever, growth cannot be a solo activity that happens beside your relationship. It must become something woven into your relationship, so that as each of you individually matures, deepens, and changes, you are doing so with shared context, shared conversation, and shared investment in each other's becoming. Amos and the necessity of agreement. Amos 3:3 asks, A simple but piercing question: can two walk together except they be agreed? This is not asking whether two people must agree on every opinion. That would be an impossible and even unhealthy standard. It is asking whether two people are walking in the same direction toward compatible destinations with enough shared vision to actually move forward together rather than pulling apart. A couple can have different personalities, different interests, even different day-to-day rhythms, and still walk together as long as there is a shared core direction, shared values, shared faith, shared commitment to the relationship's growth. Practical application: build regular rhythms of shared growth, a shared devotional time, regular conversations about where you each feel you're growing and where you feel stuck, shared goals you're working toward together, whether spiritual, financial, or personal. Ask him regularly, what are you learning right now? What are you working through? And share the same about yourself. This ongoing exchange keeps you walking the same direction even as you both individually change over the years. The cost of neglecting shared growth. I want to paint a picture for you of what drift actually looks like in real time, because it rarely announces itself dramatically. It looks like a couple who once talked for hours now sitting in the same room, each absorbed in a separate screen, comfortable in silence, but no longer curious about each other's inner world. It looks like one partner discovering a significant career shift, a spiritual struggle, or a private dream only secondhand, months after the fact, because the daily habit of sharing had quietly eroded. It looks like two people who technically know everything about each other's schedules, but very little about each other's souls. This is not usually the result of one dramatic failure. It is the accumulation of 1,000 small choices to not ask, not share, not prioritize the conversation that would have kept you connected. The remedy is equally undramatic. It is the daily unglamorous choice to keep asking, keep sharing, keep prioritizing 5 minutes of real connection over the comfort of parallel silence. A testimony worth remembering. A couple who had been married for over 25 years shared that the secret to still feeling in love decades in was what they called their Sunday recalibration, a weekly hour where they simply talked about how they each were doing internally, what they were learning, where they felt distant, where they felt close. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. But that consistent recalibration prevented decades of small unaddressed drifts from ever accumulating into a canyon between them. Key 5, fight for repair, not for victory. Conflict is not the enemy of forever love. I want to correct a myth that many carry into relationships. The belief that a love destined to last forever should have little to no conflict. This is simply not true. And believing it sets couples up for despair the moment real conflict arises, because they interpret disagreement as evidence something is fundamentally wrong. Beloved, conflict is not the enemy of forever love. Poorly handled conflict is. Every enduring relationship faces disagreement, misunderstanding, and hurts. The difference between relationships that last and relationships that don't is rarely the presence or absence of conflict. It is whether the couple has learned to fight for repair rather than for victory. The difference between repair and victory. Fighting for victory means the goal is to win the argument, to prove you were right, to make the other person concede. Fighting for repair means the goal is to understand each other, to restore connection, to solve the underlying issue, even if that means acknowledging you were wrong or that both of you contributed to the misunderstanding. Proverbs 15:1 tells us, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. This verse is not calling for weakness in conflict, it is calling for wisdom. A soft answer does not mean avoiding the issue. It means addressing it in a way that de-escalates rather than inflames. Grievous words might feel satisfying in the heat of the moment, but they cost far more than they are worth, because words spoken in anger are rarely fully forgotten, even after they are forgiven. The necessity of repair attempts. Every conflict needs what relationship researchers call repair attempts. Small gestures, even mid-argument, that signal I still love you, even though we're in conflict right now. This might be humor, a gentle touch, an acknowledgement like I hear you before continuing to make your point, or simply a pause to say, I don't want to fight with you. I want to understand you. Couples who make and receive repair attempts well tend to weather conflict without lasting damage. Couples who ignore or reject repair attempts tend to let small conflicts snowball into resentment. Practical application. The next time you are in conflict, ask yourself mid-argument, am I trying to win or am I trying to understand and repair? If you notice you are fighting for victory, pause, breathe, and consciously shift your goal. Offer a repair attempt, even something as simple as reaching for his hand while still disagreeing, and notice how it changes the emotional temperature of the conversation. The long-term cost of unrepaired conflict. I want to give you a sober warning here, because this key is one of the most consequential of all 10. Conflicts that are never truly repaired do not simply disappear when the shouting stops or the silent treatment ends. They accumulate. Relationship researchers call this emotional debt. Every unresolved hurt, every argument that ended in exhaustion rather than genuine understanding, every apology that was spoken but never truly felt, gets quietly deposited into an account that, left unaddressed, eventually comes due. Couples who reach decades together with their love still vibrant are almost never couples who never hurt each other. They are couples who develop the habit of returning to the wound, even days later, to say, I don't think we actually finished that conversation. Can we talk about it again? This willingness to revisit rather than bury is often what separates couples who drift into quiet resentment from couples who remain genuinely close across a lifetime. The power of a genuine apology. I also want to speak briefly on the anatomy of a genuine apology, because so many apologies in relationships are technically spoken but functionally empty. I'm sorry you feel that way. It's not an apology. It is a deflection disguised as one. A genuine apology names the specific action, acknowledges its impact without minimizing, and communicates a change in behavior going forward. I'm sorry I raised my voice earlier. That wasn't fair to you. And I want to work on managing my frustration differently. Carries weight. That generic, vague apologies never will. Beloved, learn to give this kind of apology and learn to recognize and gently ask for it when what you've received falls short. Practical application continued. Consider creating a simple, low-pressure ritual for revisiting unresolved moments, perhaps a brief check-in before bed, asking, is there anything from today that's still sitting heavy between us? This small habit prevents emotional debt from silently accumulating over months and years. Key 6, never stop pursuing him. The myth that pursuit ends at the altar. Many women pour tremendous energy into being pursued during courtship. And then, once the relationship is secured through marriage, through long-term commitment, they unconsciously stop pursuing in return, assuming pursuit is now unnecessary because the relationship is locked in. Beloved, this is one of the quietest ways forever love slowly cools. A man who once had to earn your attention, who once felt the thrill of being chosen and rechosen, needs to continue feeling chosen, not just once at the wedding altar, but repeatedly throughout the years. Security in commitment should never be confused with permission to stop showing genuine desire and pursuit. The Shulamite woman's pursuit. Song of Solomon offers a beautiful, unashamed picture of a woman actively pursuing her beloved. In chapter 3-2, she says, I will rise now and go about the city in the streets, and in the broad ways I will seek him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. This is not a passive woman waiting to be chosen. This is a woman actively, passionately seeking her beloved, unashamed of her desire for him. Scripture does not present this as inappropriate or overly forward. It presents it as beautiful, celebrated poetry. Practical application. Continue to initiate planned dates even after years of marriage. Express desire for him verbally and physically. Make him feel chosen, not just through duty, but through active, ongoing pursuit. Text him during the day simply to say you are thinking of him. Plan a surprise, however small. Never let the relationship settle into a place where pursuit only flows in one direction, or worse, in neither direction at all. Small pursuits matter more than grand gestures. I want to correct a common misconception here. Many women believe pursuit must mean elaborate expensive gestures, and because life often doesn't afford the time or resources for grand romance, pursuit quietly disappears altogether. But beloved, the small, consistent pursuits carry far more weight over the long run than the occasional grand gesture, a note left where he will find it. Choosing to sit beside him rather than across the room, remembering something small he mentioned weeks ago and bringing it up again, showing him he was truly heard. These small moments, repeated over years, build a felt sense of being pursued that no single anniversary trip, however wonderful, could replicate on its own. When pursuit feels one-sided, I know some of you reading this are wrestling with a painful reality. You have pursued and pursued and pursued, and it has not been reciprocated. I do not want to minimize that pain. Pursuit, to be sustainable, must eventually be met with reciprocal pursuit, or it becomes depleting rather than life-giving. If you find yourself in a season of consistently one-sided pursuit, this is worth naming directly to him, not through resentment or silent withdrawal, but through honest, vulnerable conversation. I miss feeling pursued by you. Can we talk about what's changed? Sometimes men are unaware their own pursuit has quietly stopped. Naming it plainly can be the very thing that reawakens it. The seasons of pursuit naturally ebb and flow. I also want to offer grace here. Pursuit does not remain constant at the same intensity through every season of a long relationship, and expecting it to is unrealistic. New parenthood, career transitions, grief, illness, these seasons naturally reduce the bandwidth either partner has for elaborate pursuit. What matters is not maintaining constant intensity, but ensuring pursuit never disappears entirely for extended, unacknowledged periods. A brief acknowledgement: I know I haven't had much energy for romance lately, and I miss that too, but I still choose you, can sustain a relationship through a low season far better than either silent withdrawal or unrealistic expectations of unchanged intensity. Key 7, cultivate physical and emotional intimacy as a garden, not a transaction. Intimacy requires ongoing cultivation. Physical and emotional intimacy in a long-term relationship is not a switch that stays permanently on simply because a couple is committed. It requires the same kind of ongoing cultivation as any other garden: attention, care, and the willingness to keep tending even during seasons when it doesn't feel effortless. Many couples allow intimacy to become transactional over time, a checklist item, an obligation, or worse, a source of tension and avoidance. For love to last forever, intimacy must be protected as sacred, prioritized even amid the busyness of careers, children, and daily demands that constantly compete for time and energy. 1 Corinthians and mutual devotion. 1 Corinthians 7:3-5 speaks candidly about the mutual responsibility spouses carry toward one another's intimate needs, calling both husband and wife to render due benevolence to each other, and warning against depriving one another except by mutual consent for specific seasons. This is a striking level of directness in Scripture, communicating that physical intimacy is not a peripheral or optional part of covenant love. It is a woven, essential thread. Emotional intimacy deserves equal attention. This means continuing to share your inner world with him, your fears, your joys, your doubts, your dreams, rather than allowing years of familiarity to create emotional shorthand that skips real connection. Familiarity should deepen intimacy, not replace it with assumption. Practical application: protect intimacy, intentionally schedule it if necessary, especially in demanding seasons of life, because waiting for spontaneous desire to reliably appear amid the chaos of adult responsibilities often means waiting indefinitely. Continue to share your emotional inner world with him regularly, resisting the temptation to assume he already knows everything about how you're feeling. Navigating seasons where intimacy naturally wanes. I would be doing you a disservice if I implied that intimacy remains effortless through every season of a long relationship. There are seasons, new parenthood, illness, grief, overwhelming work demands, hormonal changes where physical and emotional intimacy naturally recede. And this is not evidence of failure, but simply the honest reality of human life carried across decades. What matters in these seasons is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of honest communication about it. A couple who can say plainly, I know this is a hard season for us physically, and I want you to know, it's not about not wanting you, it's about what I'm carrying right now. That protects the relationship from the misunderstanding and quiet resentment that silence tends to breed. Silence during low seasons of intimacy often gets misinterpreted as rejection, when in reality it may simply be exhaustion. Speak plainly, even when the topic feels vulnerable. Practical application. Continued. If you are in a demanding season, consider what small, sustainable expressions of intimacy remain accessible, even when larger gestures feel impossible. A lingering hug, 10 minutes of undistracted conversation before sleep, a hand held during a difficult moment. These smaller expressions keep the connection alive until fuller intimacy becomes accessible again. K8, champion his legacy, not just his present. Loving the man he is becoming. Beloved, one of the most powerful, forever-oriented things you can do is love not just the man standing in front of you today, but actively champion the legacy he is building, his purpose, his contribution to the world, the mark he hopes to leave behind. Men often carry a quiet, sometimes barely articulated longing to matter beyond their own lifetime through their work, their children, their impact on others. A woman who understands and actively supports this longing, who asks about his long-term vision, who celebrates progress toward it, who makes sacrifices alongside him for something bigger than either of you individually, becomes woven into that legacy in a way that creates profound, lasting devotion. He begins to see you not just as someone who shares his present, but as someone essential to the future he's building. Deborah and Barak. In Judges 4, Deborah doesn't just prophesy to Barak about victory. She goes with him into the actual battle at his direct request. Verse 8, because he understood her presence was integral to the outcome, not peripheral to it. There is something profound in a woman who is willing to walk into the actual arenas of a man's calling alongside him, not just cheering from a comfortable distance. Practical application. Ask him about his long-term vision, not just his job, but his sense of purpose and legacy. Find specific, concrete ways to support that vision, whether through practical help, encouragement during setbacks, or simply consistent belief expressed over years, not just once during a difficult season. Legacy includes what you build together, not just his individual pursuits. I want to broaden this key slightly, because championing his legacy is not only about supporting his individual career or calling, it is also about the shared legacy you build together as a couple. The family culture you create, the values you pass to children if you have them, the way your relationship itself becomes a testimony to others of what committed, enduring love looks like. Many couples never explicitly discuss what they want their shared legacy to be. They simply drift into whatever pattern their families of origin modeled, for better or worse. I want to challenge you to have this conversation directly with him. What do we want people to say about our marriage 20 years from now? What do we want to have built together by the end of our lives? This kind of forward-looking conversation gives your daily choices a larger context, transforming ordinary Tuesday night dinners and Saturday errands into small deposits towards something meaningful and lasting. Ruth and Naomi, loyalty that outlasted circumstance. While Ruth's story is famous for her eventual marriage to Boaz, I want to draw your attention to an earlier moment that illustrates the spirit of championing someone's legacy, even amid uncertainty. Ruth 1:16 records Ruth's declaration to Naomi, whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. This was not spoken in a season of abundance or clarity. It was spoken amid grief, uncertainty, and genuine hardship. Ruth chose loyalty and shared future before she had any guarantee of what that future would hold. That same spirit of committed, forward-facing loyalty, choosing to invest in a shared future, even without full certainty of the outcome, is exactly what champions a partner's legacy over the long term. Practical application. Continued. Set aside time, perhaps annually, to discuss your shared legacy directly, not just individual goals, but what you're building together as a unit. Revisit this conversation periodically, because legacy, like every other part of a lasting relationship, requires ongoing tending rather than a single conversation early on. Key 9, guard your marriage or relationship as sacred territory. The necessity of boundaries. For a love to last forever, it must be actively protected from the many forces that quietly erode relationships over time, external influences that speak against your spouse, unhealthy comparisons to other relationships on social media, unresolved entanglements with the past, or simply the encroachment of busyness that leaves no space for the relationship to breathe. Genesis 2:24 says, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. The word cleave implies a fierce, deliberate attachment, a prioritization that supersedes even the closest prior relationships. This principle extends to every external force that might compete for the primary loyalty and protection that a marriage or committed relationship requires. Practical application. Be careful who you vent to about your relationship. Venting to the wrong people can plant seeds of resentment that outlast the original frustration. Protect your relationship's reputation, speaking well of him publicly, even during private struggles. Set boundaries with external relationships, whether family, friends, or even well-meaning but intrusive influences that threaten to undermine the primacy of your bond. The subtle threat of comparison. I want to address one particular threat to guarding your relationship that has grown significantly in our current age. The constant exposure to curated versions of other people's relationships through social media. It is remarkably easy scrolling through highlight reels of other couples' vacations, gifts, and grand romantic gestures to develop a quiet, corrosive dissatisfaction with your own relationship, not because your relationship is actually lacking, but because you are comparing your full, complicated, real relationship to someone else's carefully edited highlight reel. 2 Corinthians 10-12 warns against those who, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. Comparison, whether of relationships, appearances, or achievements, rarely produces gratitude. It almost always produces either false pride or corrosive discontent. Guard your heart against this particular threat by limiting exposure that consistently breeds comparison, and by intentionally practicing gratitude for the specific real gifts present in your own relationship, rather than measuring it against curated fictions. Protecting against emotional affairs. I also want to speak candidly about a threat that often goes unaddressed until it's already caused damage. Emotional affairs, or the slow development of inappropriate emotional intimacy with someone outside the relationship, often beginning innocently through friendship, shared work, or even ministry contexts, and gradually deepening into a bond that competes with the primary relationship's emotional intimacy. The best protection against this is not paranoia or excessive restriction, but proactive transparency and appropriate boundaries. Being mindful of relationships where you find yourself sharing more emotional depth with someone other than your partner, where you find yourself thinking about someone else's opinion more than your partner's, or where secrecy begins to feel necessary. Job 31:1 records Job's personal commitment. I made a covenant with mine eyes. This kind of proactive personal covenant, deciding in advance what boundaries you will maintain, rather than waiting to see how far a tempting situation might go, is wisdom that protects a forever love long before any crisis arises. Practical application continued. Regularly evaluate the external relationships and influences in your life, asking honestly whether any of them require boundaries to protect the primacy of your committed relationship. Practice gratitude intentionally, especially in seasons where comparison to others' relationships tempts you toward discontent. Key 10, let your love be rooted in something beyond feeling, the anchor that outlasts every storm. Finally, beloved, I want to leave you with the deepest key of all, the one that undergirds everything else we've discussed. A love that lasts truly forever is rarely sustained by human effort alone, however wise or disciplined. It requires a spiritual anchor, a shared commitment to God that gives the relationship a foundation deeper than either partners' fluctuating feelings, energy, or circumstances. Ecclesiastes 4:12 tells us, and if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Many teach this verse as referring simply to husband, wife, and God as the third strand. And there is beautiful truth in that picture. A relationship anchored in shared faith has a resource neither partner could offer on their own. Grace when human patience runs out. Forgiveness when human effort feels insufficient. Hope when circumstances feel hopeless. Practical application. Pray together even briefly, even imperfectly. Attend church together. Grow spiritually together. Hold each other accountable to shared values rooted in something greater than either of your individual preferences. When human effort inevitably falls short, and it will, because we are human, this spiritual anchor becomes the resource that carries a couple through what willpower alone cannot sustain. Why human effort alone eventually runs dry. I want to be honest with you about something many teachings gloss over. Even the most disciplined, loving, intentional person will eventually run out of natural patience, natural forgiveness, natural energy to keep pouring into a relationship, especially during seasons of prolonged hardship, illness, financial strain, or simply the exhaustion of raising a family while maintaining careers and responsibilities. Human love, however genuine, has a bottom to its well. This is precisely why a shared spiritual foundation matters so profoundly for a forever love as opposed to a love that merely lasts a season. When your own well runs dry, a relationship anchored in shared faith has access to a resource beyond either partner's personal reserves, grace that isn't self-generated, forgiveness that flows from having received forgiveness, strength drawn from prayer rather than willpower alone. Philippians 4:13 declares, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. This is not a verse about individual achievement alone. It applies profoundly to the achievement of sustained sacrificial love across a lifetime, which is one of the hardest and most beautiful things any two people will ever attempt to build together. Building spiritual rhythms together. I want to give you something practical here, because pray together can feel vague without concrete shape. Consider establishing simple, sustainable spiritual rhythms. A shared verse or devotional read together weekly, even briefly. Praying aloud together before significant events, a hard conversation, a major decision, a difficult season. Attending church together consistently, not as a performative habit, but as a genuine shared pursuit of God. Fasting together occasionally for specific needs in your relationship. These rhythms do not need to be elaborate or lengthy to be powerful. Consistency matters far more than duration. A testimony worth remembering. A couple who weathered a season of significant financial hardship, job loss, mounting debt, the kind of pressure that ends many marriages later, reflected that what carried them through was not clever financial strategy alone, though that mattered too. It was a nightly habit, maintained even through the hardest weeks, of simply holding hands and praying together for 5 minutes before sleep. They admitted the prayers were sometimes short, sometimes tired, sometimes barely coherent through exhaustion. But that small, consistent spiritual anchor kept them tethered to each other and to hope, even when circumstances gave them every reason toward despair and division. Bringing it all together. Beloved, let's step back and see the whole architecture we've built tonight. Making a man love you forever is not about mastering a single seductive move, a single clever phrase, or a single moment of magnetic chemistry. It is about becoming, over years, a student of his heart, a source of consistent emotional safety, fluent in his love language, a partner in shared growth, committed to repair rather than victory in conflict, an active pursuer rather than a passive recipient of love, a cultivator of intimacy, a champion of his legacy, a guardian of your shared sacred territory, and ultimately, a woman whose love is anchored in something deeper than fluctuating feeling. None of these are flashy. None of this would trend on social media the way seduction, tricks, and manipulation tactics do. But these are the actual bricks, tested across generations, validated across enduring marriages, and rooted in timeless wisdom that build a love strong enough to survive decades, storms, disappointments, and the slow passage of time that eventually reveals what was truly built to last. A word about mutual responsibility. I must say clearly, as I've said before, this teaching addresses your side of a mutual equation. A love that lasts forever cannot be built by one partner alone, no matter how devoted, wise, or intentional. He carries equal responsibility to pursue you, to protect your heart, to grow, to repair, to remain faithful. If you find yourself pouring these principles into a relationship where there is no reciprocal effort, no willingness to grow, no honoring of your worth, that is significant information, and it may point toward the need for honest conversation, counseling, or wise boundaries, not indefinite one-sided labor. What forever does not mean. I also want to clarify what forever does not mean. It does not mean tolerating abuse, chronic dishonesty, or fundamental disrespect in the name of endurance. Scripture calls us to wisdom, not martyrdom, in unsafe circumstances. The keys tonight assume a foundation of mutual commitment, basic safety, and shared goodwill, within which these principles become the tools for building something extraordinary, not the justification for enduring something harmful. Common questions answered honestly. What if I've already made mistakes early in the relationship? Is it too late to build a forever love now? No, beloved, it is not too late. Every one of these 10 keys can be applied starting today, regardless of how many years you're beginning from or how many mistakes have already been made. Relationships are not static contracts locked in place by their beginnings. They are living dynamic systems capable of genuine transformation at any point, provided both people remain willing to grow. I have watched relationships that seem hopeless after years of dysfunction become genuinely vibrant after a committed season of intentional change. It is never too late to begin building differently. How long does it typically take to see change after applying these keys? I want to give you an honest answer rather than a falsely encouraging one. Meaningful relational change rarely happens overnight. And if you begin applying these principles, expecting dramatic transformation within days or weeks, you may become discouraged and abandon the effort before it has had time to take root. In my experience, working alongside couples, genuine shifts in relational patterns typically become noticeable somewhere between 2 and 6 months of consistent application, with deeper transformation continuing to unfold over years. This is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to help you set realistic expectations so that when change comes slowly, you interpret that as normal rather than as evidence that the effort isn't working. Galatians 6-9 encourages us, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. The season of reaping is real, but it requires not fainting during the season of sowing. What if he's not interested in growing spiritually or emotionally the way I am? This is a real and painful situation many women face, and I won't offer you a shallow answer. You cannot force another person's growth, and attempting to do so through nagging, manipulation, or constant pressure typically produces resistance rather than change. What you can do is continue growing yourself, continue modeling the kind of love and maturity you hope to see, and pray consistently for his heart, while also being honest with yourself about what you can and cannot accept long-term if genuine growth never comes. Sometimes a partner's growth is sparked unexpectedly by simply witnessing consistent, patient love over time. Sometimes it isn't, and that requires its own wisdom and counsel to navigate How do I know if I'm doing too much, pouring in without him reciprocating? A helpful test is this. Are you giving from a place of genuine overflow and joy, or from anxiety and fear that withdrawing your effort will cause the relationship to collapse? Healthy giving, even generous giving, comes from security. Anxious giving, even when it looks identical from the outside, comes from fear and tends to breed quiet resentment over time. If you notice persistent resentment, exhaustion, or a growing sense that you are the only one investing, that is important information worth addressing directly with him, and if necessary, with the support of counseling. Do these keys apply the same way in every culture and context? The specific expressions of these keys, how pursuit looks, how intimacy is discussed, how conflict is culturally handled, will vary meaningfully across different backgrounds, families, and communities. And I want to honor that, rather than pretend one cultural expression is the only valid one. But the underlying principles themselves, safety, understanding, repair, pursuit, shared growth, spiritual anchoring, are not culturally specific. They reflect something true about how human hearts, made in God's image, are wired to receive and sustain love across any context. Apply the principle. Let the specific expression be shaped wisely by your own relationship, family, and community. A word for every season. To the woman newly dating or courting, these 10 keys are not just for marriage. Begin practicing them now. Watch how he responds to your pursuit, your vulnerability, your attempts at repair during small disagreements. His response now often previews the pattern of the decades ahead. To the newly married woman, you are laying tracks that your relationship will run on for years to come. Be intentional now while habits are still forming, rather than waiting for dysfunction to calcify before addressing it. To the woman married many years feeling distant, it is not too late to rebuild. Choose one key from tonight's teaching and begin there. Small, consistent change, sustained over months, has restored relationships that seem beyond repair. To the woman walking through genuine betrayal or ongoing harm, please hear me clearly. This teaching assumes a baseline of safety and mutual goodwill. If you are in a situation marked by abuse, chronic infidelity, or fundamental dishonor, please seek wise, godly counsel and prioritize your safety above the pursuit of forever at any cost. A final illustration, the oak and the storm. I want to leave you with one final picture. Consider two trees planted side by side. One, an oak with shallow roots, grown quickly in loose, easy soil, and another, an oak whose roots were forced through years of resistance and drought to dig deep into the rocky ground beneath it. When the storm comes, and it always comes, eventually, for every relationship, the shallow-rooted tree, however tall and impressive it appeared in calm weather, often falls. But the deep-rooted tree, having spent years developing an unseen foundation, bends, sways, loses some leaves perhaps, but stands. Beloved, the 10 keys we have discussed tonight are not decorative leaves. They are root work. They are not designed to make your relationship look impressive to onlookers during easy seasons. They are designed to sink roots deep enough that when the inevitable storms of life arrive, financial hardship, illness, loss, the ordinary erosion of time, your love does not merely survive, but stands tall and unshaken, a living testimony to what patient, faithful, God-anchored building can accomplish. The roots you cannot see are the ones that matter most. I want to leave you with one final thought on this image, because it carries a truth easily missed. No one applauds a tree for its roots. Visitors admire the branches, the leaves, the shade, the visible immediate fruit of the tree's life. The roots do their work entirely unseen, unglamorous, unnoticed, often for years before any storm ever tests them. This is precisely the nature of the work we have discussed tonight. Becoming a student of his heart, choosing patience during a hard conversation, praying together on an ordinary Tuesday when nothing dramatic is happening, protecting your relationship's reputation when no one is watching. None of these will earn public admiration in the moment. It is quiet, hidden, root level labor But beloved, it is precisely this unseen labor that determines whether your love merely looks beautiful during calm seasons or actually survives the storms every relationship eventually faces. Do not grow weary in the unseen work. Do not measure your progress only by visible, immediate results. Trust that every quiet, faithful choice, every act of patience, every moment of chosen understanding, every prayer whispered together in ordinary moments is sinking a root that will one day hold your love steady when the wind finally comes. A closing declaration. Sister, let this be the season where you stop chasing sparks and start building fire. Let this be the season where you become a lifelong student of the man beside you, rather than assuming you already know all there is to know. Let this be the season where safety, not just excitement, becomes the hallmark of your love, because safety is what allows excitement to keep returning again and again across decades. Let this be the season where you pursue as fiercely as you once wanted to be pursued, where you fight for repair instead of victory, where you champion not just his presence but his legacy, and where your love finds its deepest anchor, not in feeling alone but in a shared foundation that can withstand every flood. One final word on grace for yourself. Before we close, I want to speak directly to whatever quiet self-judgment might be rising in your heart right now as you consider these 10 keys. Perhaps you've recognized areas where you've fallen short, moments where safety was broken instead of built, seasons where pursuit quietly stopped, conflicts fought for victory rather than repair. Sister, receive grace here. No woman reading this teaching has embodied all 10 keys perfectly, consistently across every season of her relationship. That is not the standard. The standard is growth, the willingness to recognize where you've fallen short, receive God's grace for it, and choose starting today to build differently going forward. Philippians 3:13-14 gives us Paul's own posture toward growth, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth onto those things which are before. I press toward the mark. You are not disqualified by your past shortcomings in this relationship. You are simply invited today to press forward with fresh intention that is available to every single woman reading this, regardless of where your relationship currently stands. A closing prayer. Father, thank you for the gift of love and for the sacred privilege of building something that lasts. Teach us to be students of the heart you've entrusted to us, patient cultivators rather than passive recipients. Give us wisdom to fight for repair rather than victory, courage to pursue even after the newness fades, and hearts anchored deeply enough in you that no flood can quench what we are building. Let our love be a living testimony of your faithfulness, strong as death, unquenchable by many waters. In Jesus' name, amen. Discussion, questions for the chat. Which of the 10 keys discussed tonight do you feel is strongest in your relationship, and which needs the most growth? Have you ever mistaken excitement for safety or safety for boredom? How did that shape your relationship? What is your understanding of his primary love language, and how consistently are you expressing it? Reflect on a recent conflict. Were you fighting for victory or for repair? What might you do differently next time? In what ways have you continued to actively pursue him even after the relationship became secure or long-term? What is one concrete way you can support or champion his sense of purpose and legacy this month? How is your relationship currently protected or unprotected from external influences that could erode trust or intimacy over time? What role does shared faith currently play in your relationship, and how might you deepen that spiritual anchor together? Is there emotional debt from unrepaired conflict that has quietly accumulated in your relationship? What would it look like to revisit it with grace? If you imagine your relationship 20 years from now, what would you want people to say about the legacy you and your partner built together? And what is one small step toward that vision you can take this week? What a forever love gives back to you. I want to close by reminding you of something easily forgotten in the midst of all this talk of building, tending, and stewarding. A forever love is not simply labor you pour out. It is also, over time, one of the richest sources of joy, companionship, and security available in this life. The same effort that builds a lasting love also builds gradually a home for your own heart, a place where you too are deeply known, deeply safe, and deeply cherished across decades. This is not one-sided labor disguised as spiritual duty. It is mutual investment in something that, done well, blesses both of you far beyond what either of you could create alone. The oak with deep roots does not only survive the storm, it also provides across its long life shade, shelter, and beauty that a shallow-rooted sapling never could. That is what you are building, sister. Not just a love that survives, but a love that becomes, across the years, one of the deepest sources of joy either of you will ever know. Remember too, that you were never meant to build this alone, nor to build it by sheer effort, divorced from grace. Every key we've discussed tonight finds its truest strength, not in perfect execution, but in a heart continually surrendered to God, asking for wisdom where you lack it, and receiving grace for every place you fall short along the way. Building a forever love is not a performance to be judged, but a lifelong act of worship, loving another image bearer of God, faithfully, patiently, and joyfully, for as long as you both shall live. Take your time with these questions, sit with them prayerfully. A love that lasts forever is not built in a single dramatic moment. It is built in 1,000 small, faithful choices made consistently over a lifetime. Beloved, may your love be strong as death, and may many waters never be able to quench it. I appreciate you, sisters. Go and build something that lasts forever.